Good evening, and tonight we're going to have a chat about EHCPs. This is something which we get frequently contacted about at Bright Heart Education. Many parents are going through the process or have various questions about it. And tonight we have Director John Salmon, and he is an experienced teacher and former head teacher with an M.A. in education, and he's worked as an assessor for students with EHCPs. So he is well positioned to answer questions and any further questions you bring up this evening. So thank you, John, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone. Indeed, we have had many inquiries that pertain to EHCPs, and that tends to be a little bit confusing. The process is fairly lengthy, and there are many steps to the process, and we'll try and, to the best of our ability, explain in a nutshell what EHCPs are, what the process consists of, what kind of difficulties you can encounter when trying to secure an EHCP.
Thank you, John. And let's start off, really from the beginning. So, what is an EHCP? We have some parents who maybe just in the starting blocks, and they've been told, perhaps by a teacher, that they should think about an EHCP for their child.
Certainly. EHCP stands for Education, Health and Care Plan, and EHCPs were introduced in the year 2014. The idea being to improve outcomes for children and young people, because it comprises people from the ages of 0 to 25 years old. So children and young people who have a special educational need, including disabilities, of course, and that require additional support and assistance within the current school system. EHCPs put together all aspects, including health, education, social care, together to try and attain the most optimal learning outcomes. And the first step to securing an EHCP is to get an Ehc Needs Assessment, which we can talk about a little bit later. In order to get an EHCP, you have to contact your local authority or LA. An EHCP cannot be carried out by a school, for example.
Great, thanks, John, for that. And then it comes down to also, okay, we know what it is, but then who is eligible for getting an EHCP?
So we were saying that it comprises children and young people up to the age of 25 who have a special educational need or a disability, provided that their needs cannot be met by a school. So if an early years institution, an early years provider, a school, or a post-16 institution cannot meet the child's needs in terms of their special educational needs, their disabilities, then you need an EHCP. So they are eligible. That doesn't mean that they're going to secure it. We can explain the process a little bit later, but that's the first step. That's the first thing we need to know. The majority of children or young people who have some kind of learning difficulty will not be getting an EHCP, because in many cases these needs can be met by the institution, by the school or the institution directly. So in order to understand who can get it in the first place, maybe we should talk about learning difficulties and disabilities. Very often they overlap. It's important to understand that. But when we talk about a learning difficulty, that means that you have a difficulty in learning that the majority of other children or young people of the same age do not have. A disability, which would be something that prevents you from making use of facilities, for example, in the same manner as other children or young people, young adults, for example. As I was saying, you can have people who only have a disability. For example, they have complex health needs, and they wouldn't necessarily have a learning difficulty, or they may just have a learning difficulty and no disability. Very often, it is the case that they have both. If the institution is not able to meet those, then you are able to seek what we call special educational provision, which means that you do have special educational needs that, in their turn, need further support, and that's when you're seeking an EHCP.
Thank you, John, for clarifying that, and that's great in order to break it down, and to then parents can have an idea if they think that their child is eligible, which then moves us to the next point in normally a person's thinking. What now? What is the process to get an EHCP?
Okay, what you just said about parents happens to be very important. It is actually embedded in the SEND Code of Practice that the early observations of parents can be crucial. They observe that there's some kind of learning difficulty. Teachers may observe the same thing. And naturally, the first thing would be to try and make a series of adaptations to the provision that is taking place at school. If that does not suffice, you may want to consult specialists who can give an opinion to try and help secure that provision in such a manner that the needs are going to be met. If that is not the case, then you may be needing an EHC Needs Assessment, which, as I said, is the first step to getting an EHCP. Now, this does not necessarily have to be done directly by parents. It could be done by professionals, such as a teacher, or it could be done by any individual older than 16 and up to the age of 25, who could initiate the EHCP process by requesting it from the local authority or LA. They, the local authority, would be able to determine whether there is a need for an EHCP or not by carrying out that EHC Needs Assessment. They do need to determine this within 6 weeks to determine whether they're going to proceed with the EHC Needs Assessment. And they will be looking for evidence, really, to make sure that the child or the young adult is not getting their needs met and is not able to make the progress, is not able to make academic progress or learning or obtain learning outcomes accordingly. So the EHC won't necessarily result in an EHCP, but that is the first step, as I was saying. And in order to secure the provision, to secure the funding for that provision, you do need that EHCP in place.
Great, thank you, John. And you have mentioned there a bit about the EHC Needs Assessment before. Would you like to expand a little bit more about that?
Yes. So the first step, as I was saying, to getting an EHCP is the EHC, or Education, Health and Care Assessment, which would follow a request for an EHCP made to the local authority. This would entail gathering information about the child or the young person's needs. This would be carried out by the local authority directly. And what they would look for would be advice, educational advice, for example, from a head teacher, typically a head teacher, You can get a doctor's assessment of needs also. And this is very important also, parents' views regarding the needs of their child. It is necessary to get that EHC needs assessment in order to secure the EHCP.
Great, thank you. So that would be then the first step in this process. And then the next one, which often we receive, how long does this take, to get an EHCP? And, can I begin now?
Yes, this is a tricky one because very frequently there are delays in the process. LAs have many cases they have to cope with. They're also underfunded, so it becomes difficult. Then there are discrepancies throughout the process. So, I mean, the idea is that you would be completing the whole process within 20 weeks, okay? So that's I think, the most important figure to remember. And you also need a draft of that EHCP. This is, of course, once the EHC needs assessment has been approved, to be produced within 14 weeks, so that it can then be revised. Those are the two most important things to remember, but it is quite a lengthy process, and there are several timelines that have to be met. I think maybe we can share a diagram that we put up on our website, if that's possible, because I think it explains it pretty clearly.
So here we have the process. So this is a recent blog that we've done on an EHCP, and here we can see the statutory timescales for the EHC needs assessment and EHC plan development.
So I won't go into all details about this, but let me just do an overview. The first thing then, as you can see at the very top, is the request for the assessment that you make to the local authority. You bring it to the local authority's attention, and then they have to decide whether or not they will conduct the EHC needs assessment. They have to notify parents within a maximum of 6 weeks, as I was mentioning. And they can also, of course, decide that an EHC needs assessment is not necessary, that the learning difficulties, that they don't merit it, okay? In which case, of course, an appeal process would begin if the parents so choose, or if the young person so chooses. If it does go through, however, the LA would gather the information, as you can see on the left side, and then they would draft a plan, which, as I said, would take 14 weeks. There's a further 15 calendar days to make any comments about it, to try and make any changes that need to be made. Then, of course, there is a possibility that it won't be approved, okay? Which, of course, can also merit an appeal. And we can maybe talk about appeals later on. But once it has gone through that draft, then it should be completed within 20 weeks from the moment that it was first requested. I think that's pretty much a summary. There are more details on our blog as to how the exact process goes, but that's pretty much a summary of the timelines.
Great, thanks, John. And also just to reference, that diagram came from the code, the SEN Code of Practice. And, we also reference that document in the blog, and that's also very helpful for looking at these details. So that comes, as you mentioned in the diagram, sometimes there can be, there can be a no, or there can be delays. So, what can I do if my child's EHC needs assessment or their EHCP is delayed or refused?
The first step, of course, would be to contact the local authority, the LA, to inquire about the reasons for the delay. That's an obvious step to take. If they do not provide an adequate explanation, parents or the young person are able to contact their local SENDIAS, which is Information, Advice and Support Service for SEN and disabilities. The idea is that they should have that draft within 14 weeks, as I was saying, and complete it within 20 weeks. If they do not produce it within those timelines, then you are able to contact the LA. And the advice here is to seek the most senior person at the LA to inquire about the delay, to try and speed up the process, or to find out what's going on, why you did not get it on time. If the EHC Needs Assessment is refused, for example, then the idea here would be to start an appeal process, okay? To appeal to the first tier tribunal, in other words. It is always good to be well informed, to read the code, to get a good understanding of it. Parents can, of course, seek further support. They can always look for the advice, for example, of an advocate. They could, of course, look for legal advice or legal support in the process if they want to make sure they secure the EHCP and they disagree with the decision. If it's a refused EHCP, same thing. There's a right to appeal the process, naturally, and that would also entail an appeal before the tribunal, the same tribunal. That's under the Children and Families Act, of course. As I was saying, it's always good to get the help of a mediator. There's plenty of information also that you can look up online. We can talk about that a bit later, but there's always information available online, or looking for professional help. The SEN Tribunal have 2 months from the date of the letter received from the local authority, or 1 month from the point of the mediation certificate to act upon it. It's always good, of course, to look at the reasons for an appeal and do that very, very carefully, and that would include, say, evidence from teachers, from any assessments that you may have, educational psychologists, for example, parent observations. The key point being that the child's needs are not being met, which is, of course, the reason why you requested the EHCP in the first place. If that is not the case, then it is necessary to initiate an appeal process and to do this as quickly as possible, of course.
Great, thank you, John, for that in-depth analysis of those options. And let's say, as a parent that you've gone through this process and it's been successful, mm-hmm. Then how long would this EHC plan last?
Well, you get an annual review to decide whether there are further needs or whether any modifications are merited. This would include someone from the LA SEN department. They would also ask for professionals to participate. That could be, for example, a tutor, it could be a language therapist, someone from the school, even a TA. And then you issue a series of recommendations. Targets are set. And at times also, you would need to determine whether the child still needs an EHCP. It might be the case that they no longer need an EHCP in place. The LA have 4 weeks from the time of this meeting to make a decision. And that decision, of course, has to be aligned with those recommendations any amendments can also be made, or they may just leave the plan as it is.
Thank you, John. So, part of the reason for going along this path is always, parents thinking or, certainly seeking additional support for their children.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're looking for more resources in various forms. So, a question that often comes up, what kind of support are you entitled to, once you get this EHCP?
The bottom line is to meet the child or young person's requirements. Though if those needs cannot be met by the early years provider, by the school, by the post-16 institution, for example. And if that is the case, then an EHCP would secure some funding. It can be in the shape of a personal budget. It can be in the shape of funding that is assigned to the school to provide that extra support, that assistance within a school setting. It could also include some support outside of a school setting, which could be, for example, one-to-one support in person or even online. It can include third parties, for example, an agency. We are currently providing support for local authority funded provisions that involve children with EHCPs. And parents do have a right, by the way, to choose their educational provider. They do have a say in this. As long as that educational provider can meet the needs in accordance with what has been set out in the EHCP. And as long as that provision can be met appropriately, then it would later be decided whether or not the provision would continue along the same lines, or whether further provisions need, maybe arrangements need to be made to be added to that provision.
Thank you, John. So, sometimes parents are really thrown into the deep end with this. So it'd be good just to have just a general overview of the different parts of the EHCP, perhaps as a summary. You don't need to go into specific detail, but if you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, an EHCP is quite comprehensive, and it involves many different aspects. We talked about it before. The idea is to take all these aspects into consideration in quite a comprehensive document. So I won't obviously talk about every one of the sections that are part of an EHCP, but in a nutshell, it includes the views and interests, aspirations of a child. It includes the healthcare needs, the social care needs. It includes a series of outcomes, of course. It includes the provisions that have to be made to meet the special educational needs, and the healthcare and social care provisions that have to be made. It would name the school or the provider, and it would also include some details about the funding. The sections that are probably the most important are, well, section F primarily, because that's what outlines the provision that has to be made to meet the child's needs. And that should be aligned with what needs are described in section B, which includes the special educational needs of the individual. Then there's also the fact that it has to be revised very, very carefully to make sure that everything is outlined clearly, that sections B and F match. And if a parent is unhappy with any of these, with any of the sections, with any of the details that are provided, they do have 15 days to contest that and to seek changes to be made.
Thank you for those details, John. And for interested parents and parties, you can also look at the blog on our website, which details each section and lists what is in there, and so you can get familiar with what will be required and what detail is needed. So, those parents who are thinking of embarking upon this journey, and it is really a journey, where can they find advice and support, to get an EHCP for their child?
I would definitely recommend checking our blog, because it includes links to many, many resources that can be used. But just to give an overview, we've mentioned the code already. I would definitely look at section 9 of the code very carefully. There's plenty of information about EHCPs. A very interesting organization that has plenty of advice online, including even packages that can be used for appeals, for example. Plenty of information about Ehc Needs Assessments, about EHCPs themselves, is IPSIA, definitely. They even have courses, if anyone is interested in taking any courses.
I'll share that now.
Please, that's one of the best websites to go to. It includes legal information too, plenty of legal information that can be used. If you're looking for legal information, I would go to the Education Law Association. We've also shared a link on our blog. They can give you more professional legal advice. Then it's always good to contact groups within the community. There are plenty of online community groups, such as Scope, for example, Special Needs Jungle, who publish plenty of articles with very useful information. It's a great website to go to. And then there are fora out there. There's a national network of parents that share advice all the time, best practices. And there are plenty of practical examples of other people who have gone through the process and encountered difficulties and what they've done to cope with these. There's, of course, always the option of calling us. We are always available. We have helped many different individuals throughout the process, as a matter of fact. We have had people contact us from the very, very beginning of the process, and we've been hand in hand helping them throughout the whole process until they secured a provision, until they secured the funding. And we have, of course, provided all aspects of the provision for them. But we are always open to a phone call, to an email, and we would be very happy to give advice at any point.
Many thanks, John. Certainly that was informative. And, this really, I think we did cover the main aspects this evening of all about EHCPs. And, as you mentioned, as an organization, we're happy to help and or also to point you in the right direction. As a parent, you're not alone. There are other parents who are, going through this process, and there are organizations out there.
It's a complex, multifaceted process. And yes, please seek help, seek advice. And definitely we are always there to provide it. Even if you just want a phone call, just to seek advice, a free consultation at any point, of course.
Great. Well, many thanks for those who've tuned in, and we hope it's been helpful to you.